How are you?
I'm good. It's a good question, and it's always a tricky question. Somebody asked me today, only about half an hour ago, how's your day been so far? And I had to say, it's been pretty frustrating. I've been trying to get some technology working that simply wouldn't work. Uh, but I'm still good. What about your day?
Uh, that was my night
Oh,
at 6 a.m. Hmm. I'm a bit sad.
Hello.
I'm not sure why.
you're a bit what?
Oh,
Sad.
I think I'm sorry. I didn't hear anything you said up until the very last word.
Sad.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's all I heard. Sorry.
Mm.
Anyway, I hear you guys fine now.
How are you, Marcus?
Doing well. How about you?
We're just discussing that. Yeah,
Yeah, you were saying you had a frustrating technology day. I guess I was just asking to people, like,
yeah.
did you get your issue resolved?
No, it's still up
Still
in the
no?
air. Yeah, yeah. But interestingly, once I go, well, that's it. I'm going to stop trying. Then everything is fine again.
That's good.
But round and round in circles. Uh, but easier than for Bianca because I can see exactly what's going on with that. Whereas Bianca's not quite sure why she feels a little sad. Mm. So if we get Marcus, if we get underneath the social bullshit about how we're going and how things are and so on, are you really fine?
Um, right now I feel fine. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. But even if you said you weren't feeling fine, I would still say good.
That's good.
Yeah. So I haven't seen you here before, so tell us where you're up to with this stuff.
Sure. Yeah, this is my first time. Thank you for sending an invite via someone that I only know as Elad on Liberation Unleashed.
Oh yeah, good on
Um,
you.
I've been working with him since I don't even know for sure if it's a him. I'm assuming it's a him since September. Um, and I would say it's been I don't really know how to describe the process. It's been I don't know. I could say ups and downs or whatever, but it's been going well. And then anyway, the other day I mentioned to him um, I started reading a book that he recommended by another person I think who had gone through Liberation Unleashed. And at the very beginning, she had a quote that was attributed to the Buddha talking about how the best part of the path to awakening was the people that you're on it with, or something like that. And I was like, man, I have no one to talk to about this. And then he sent me the link to your group.
Good
So
one.
that's how
Yeah,
I ended up here.
yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's a huge thing. That's probably my main motivation for starting these groups was that people can get together who are just really even people on Liberation Unleashed are quite isolated from each other. So
Yes.
yeah, and it's certainly one of the things that is a standout for me with these groups is that absolute amazing connection that happens when people are authentic and spontaneous. Yeah, yeah, good
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. I can confirm that Elad is a bloke, although he may not identify
Okay.
as a bloke. He will identify as a person, or maybe
Right.
even not that, you know. But yeah,
Just for the
he,
convenience of knowing which pronoun to use.
yeah. He's actually a really, really lovely bloke. Yeah, he's a psychologist by profession, and
Hmm.
uh, he's one of the most humanistic people I've ever come across. So yeah, you're in good hands with him for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell there's only so much you can communicate over text and those messages and just I don't know, just like I guess the intuition that he has to point me in some different direction or point something out has been um,
Mm,
yeah, it's been very spot on.
yeah. Yeah, he's insightful, that's for sure, and huge-hearted, really big-hearted bloke. At least that's been my experience with him. Yeah.
Have you met him in person?
Not in person, no, only on Zoom. No, he actually lives in Israel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Given what's
Yeah, I
going on
thought
over there, it's even more amazing how
I
humanistic
know.
he is. Yeah.
I know it's hard to believe.
So
And
are you?
where are you, Marcos?
I'm in Seattle, Washington, in the US. Yeah. Where Hey, you're in Sydney, Vince, and where are you, Bianca?
Warsaw, Poland.
Oh, you're in Poland. Wow.
Yeah,
It's 6 a.m. in the morning there.
we're all
Sorry
over the
for my
world.
English.
Mm.
That's great.
Yeah, we get them from everywhere here. Yeah, all over the place, which is really interesting. You know, we get on and we say good morning, and it's can be evening or any time of the night or day for other people. Yeah,
Uh, it's 9 p.m. here, and I was not even planning on joining. I was about to start a TV show, and then my calendar popped up, and I was like, oh, well, let's check it out.
yeah, great. Yeah. I call it synchronicity. You know, things just happen, don't they?
Yep.
So have you had any little shifts, any big shifts, any shifts as you've been working with ELED?
I feel like, yes. I haven't had a big sh shift yet, but I've had, I guess, so many times where it just feels like something that I didn't understand before seems more obvious. I think, you know, a couple of months ago when this started, I don't think I could really differentiate between um, the world as described by thoughts and the direct experience of things. And I mean, it seems like a small thing or an obvious thing now, but now I can sometimes, feel the difference be between
Yep,
that.
that's that's a big one. Yeah, where you're headed is is not out of one world, but into two worlds, and the other world is that world that you might describe fairly grossly, I suppose, as the direct experience world. So that world is it exists at an experiential level, but can't be put into words. That's where the magic is. That's where you'll get blown away by ordinary, everyday, simple things that just hit you in the face. You know, the way, the color, the vibrancy of the shape of whatever will just bowl you over at that level. But it's a level that can't really be described in words. So the way I see it, the the unreal world, which most people call the real world, is a world full of concepts, and where, in fact, the majority of people take those concepts to be actual, and they relate to those concepts like they were actual things. So they have great investments in concepts like reputation and morality and responsibility and control and all of that stuff that doesn't actually exist as a thing. It's just somehow that we can describe something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes responsibility is the one that I've had a hard time sort of letting go of that concept. But I've started to see, Elon's very patient. He points out, um, he tries to point me in the direction of who is being responsible, or to find the one that's, there to be responsible.
Yeah, I guess
And it's like,
LU's main focus is on seeing that there isn't a self running the show. But
right,
that's just one portal into this stuff. There are an infinite number of openings of portals into this, and so many of those things are linked together. One rests on top of the other. So once you see some of them fall, or the ones that rest on that also fall. So and that's why no self is valuable, because so many things rest on that one. And once we recognize that that is just a concept, um, then all these other things tend to fall fairly quickly. Don't expect a big shift. A lot of people do. Most people do. Most people expect to get blown away by something, and all of a sudden they're in a totally different place. Um, when the reality is, it's more likely that these things will sneak up on you as little things change, and all of a sudden, if you take stock and think, how was I 6 months ago? And you go,
mm,
oh, you know what? It's really quite different now in my reactions to things. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, I would definitely say that I would find the things that I do and the way that I am to be night and day different from 6 months ago. Um, but at the same time, I don't feel like I would be able to say, I don't feel like there's clarity on, again, coming from Elon's perspective, that idea of there being no self. Um, but it's like at times I mean, if I sit there and pay attention, I can definitely see that doesn't,
yeah,
that there's nothing there holding everything together, but then everything just the next second later, if I'm not looking specifically at that, then
yeah, yeah. The
the
old
habit
habits
returns.
kick in. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, see, now it's well worth recognizing that there's a difference between an actual self and a sense of a self. Right? And the sense of a self will likely continue way beyond you recognizing that there is no actual self. But that sense of a self is an illusion. Or if you like, when you believe that it points to an actual self, it's a delusion. But we want to change it from a delusion into an illusion.
I
So
see.
Bianca's heard this one before, but you go to a magician show and watch them saw a woman in half, right? And what you experience is that your mind is at odds with your senses. Your senses will tell you, yes, a woman is being sawed in half, but nobody jumps up and calls an ambulance or shouts stop. Right?
Right,
Because their mind says no, it's an illusion. You
right,
see, now go back to that same show the second day, and you're still trying to think, how's he doing it? And maybe even the third day you'll think, how's he doing it? But by the fourth or the fifth day, you go, you know what? This is boring. And
right,
you don't bother to go back. And that's the nature of the sense of self. It will
right.
persist as an illusion, but you'll get to the point where you go, well, it's not really worth paying any attention to. It's just something that's there.
So it's not so much as like a big shift, as more just eventually a line is
Yeah,
passed where,
exactly. Yeah, and this is so for all doubts. So doubts come along for almost everybody on this path, and they go, "Oh, I've got these doubts." And when I ask them, "Is the doubt about whether there's a self running the show, or is the doubt about whether you're awake?" And almost always they'll say, "Oh no, I doubt whether I'm awake."
yeah.
You want to attend to something there?
No, I was just thinking, I was thinking, am I doubting more? I mean, I definitely doubt that I'm awake. Then I was thinking, am I doubting um that there's a sense of self? And I would say again, it's like when I'm specifically, I mean, this goes right back to what when I'm specifically looking, I can not find it, but it's more like there's um it's almost like the feeling of like if you've lost something in a room and you know it's got to be there. It's like somehow I still believe that it's
Yep,
got to be there.
yep. Yeah. So I've got another metaphor that I use for this one that says you crave a watermelon and you go to the fridge and you open the fridge and look to see if the watermelon's in there and it's not. So you shut the fridge door and you walk across the room. Are you going to turn around and go back and look in the fridge again, thinking that maybe it was hiding behind the milk or something? So,
I know. And that reminds me of the Santa Claus one too. And I'm like, man, I can see that so clearly in the metaphor. It's like, uh, but yet I don't know. And it
yeah,
experientially, it's just doesn't
yeah,
cross over from the metaphor so far.
yeah.
But
So recognize that a sense of self is something that your senses will keep telling you
yeah,
that that a self exists simply because of old conditioning, right? So what happens is what we have is a sensation that gets attached to a story, and the story
yes,
is, oh, I did that. I'm
right.
responsible for that. I'm whatever. I'm, right? And that story gets attached to the sensation, and that's what produces a sense of self. It's a feeling with stories attached to it. And that's going to continue until the stories drop off.
Mhm.
And the stories are conditioned, so they're really, really habitual. You know, you've had a lifetime of those things being cemented in. So you don't expect them to just disappear overnight. But the moment you look at them, you recognize that they're just stories. You know, when you go looking for a self that you can't find one,
Right.
how many times do you need to keep looking to confirm that there's not one there to find? Another way to
Right.
look at this too, the way that I would approach this is to say, let's not look at what's not there. Let's look at what is there. And what is there are stories that you've been collecting since the day you were born. Right? You've been collecting these
Yeah.
stories about Marcus, what he looks like, what he likes. Does he like chocolate? Does he not like chocolate? Does he like fruit? Is he into exercise? Whatever, all of these characteristics about, and that adds up to a book. There's many, many chapters of stuff about Marcus in there. Right? Now they're just stories, but guess what? We respond to those stories. And that response is what gives you the sense of self.
And that's just, I mean, would you say it's like an emotional response that
Otherwise, yes, every response is an emotional response.
so like the feeling of, I mean, I guess at times it could be, you have the stories and then you have an aversion to them or something you don't like about it, or other times it's like a fondness for them or
Yeah,
nostalgia or something like that.
yeah, of course. And every story has other stories hanging off it. And
Right.
those stories have stories hanging off it. So it's really, really complex, infinitely complex, actually. But if you see it like a book, and well, like an electronic book, even more than a paper book, in that you've got links from one story. So you've got this
Right.
story about Marcus, and then you go to that, and there are links about other elements of that particular story about Marcus, and it just goes on and on and on. And they don't go away. What we know is, though, is that those responses are just there. Some of them are pleasant, some of them are neutral, and some of them are unpleasant. And we would like to think that we can get rid of the unpleasant ones and keep the pleasant ones. But in fact, every one of them leads to identification. And really, identification is what this whole waking up business is about. Well, there's a lot of things that it's about, but that's one of them, you know. So
Right.
identification is a thing. And so if you identify as something, that's that's keeping you in a world that's very limited. What you
Yeah.
are, what you are is unknown. It's beyond our puny minds as human beings to recognize the reality of existence or non-existence, if you like, or everything. Yeah. It's just way too complex for us to get our mind around it. So recognizing that what you are can't be known relieves you of an attempt to try and define it. But guess what? Identification is an attempt to define it. So when you can recognize that any identification is limiting, what's left? Something beautifully unlimited.
Wait, when you say identification is an attempt to find it, do you mean um, identifying with not the self, but with something else,
Same
outside of the
thing.
self even?
Yeah,
Yeah.
same thing. Yeah. So if you go to a non-duality kind of thing, that they'll have you trying to identify as awareness or consciousness. If you go to a church, they'll have you trying to identify, well, maybe they won't, but others will try and have you identifying as God or whatever. But every one of them is just a story.
Right.
I mean, does it fit for you that what you actually are can't be defined?
It it definitely. I mean, I can put it this way. I can recognize the tendency of the mind to want to come in and say to want to come in and as soon as you say that and try to wrap something around it, like it's the thing that everything appears in or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
when you say the words, like I can immediately think, yeah, I it does track with me, but then I notice that kicking in of some, just like a craving to want to
Yep. Yep.
have a from here to there type of
Yeah. Right.
feeling.
Well, there's the next thing that you stimulate in me to point to, and that is that craving is another portal for you.
Mhm.
Right? So in this world that we're looking at, there's no such thing as right or wrong, or even good or bad. We can, at a really superficial level, we can say, oh, pleasant feelings are good, unpleasant feelings are bad. But you know what? Unpleasant feelings are opportunities, and pleasant feelings are often an escape from something. So, everything can be everything as well. And so if you get the idea that any opinion about anything is a judgment, and any judgment is facing in the wrong direction, even though we say there's no right or wrong, you get the concept
Right.
that what we need to do is move towards what we find as unpleasant, what we find as difficult. If we go towards it, mm, here's another useful meme for you. It's never about what comes up. It's always about what triggers it to come up. And what triggers it to come up is not what we see. So when we get triggered and we have an emotional response, particularly an unpleasant emotional response, we're trained by our culture to look at the circumstances that cause that response to happen. And so
Right.
we're always blaming. We're blaming circumstances, we're blaming people, we're blaming something outside of ourselves for what goes
Mhm.
on. When in fact, all that has done is triggered something that was already inside us.
Yeah.
And if we
I have
move in that direction, yes, yeah, you get that. I see that a recognition in you about that one. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think that's what led me into all this in the first place was just kind of coming at that from the other side, learning that way of learning how that's also a way of forgiveness that's not, mm, that doesn't really involve any other person, um, because there's no one to
Absolutely.
blame.
Yep. And forgiving ourselves, it's a really interesting idea, that one. Forgiving ourselves is huge. It's a big thing. And most people will say, what have I got to forgive myself for? There's nothing to forgive. But underneath, for almost all of us, there's guilt. And if we can recognize what that's about, then a forgiveness, and not in a superficial, shitty social way of
No,
forgiveness,
no.
but rather an acceptance of the inevitability of what has already happened, has already done, is a huge part of that kind of thing.
Right. Like not not like excusing or exonerating yourself, but just seeing that it couldn't have happened.
Any other
It
way,
wasn't
you got it.
right.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. So what comes to mind for me then was that Liberation Unleashed tends to talk about going through this gateless gate to a point of recognizing that we are awake. But in fact, that gate, well, when you get through that gate, you turn around and see that there never was a gate. There's no gate there. And when you get
Right.
through, you also see that there's no such thing as awake. That itself is just a concept, right? And
Right.
it refers to a perspective, if anything. But that perspective, that's not that's not rock solid, inevitable kind of stuff. It comes and goes like everything. We're always moving in and out, up and down, back and forward kind of thing. So,
Right.
there's no there's the time is going to come when somebody's going to say to you, "Hey, Marcus, you know what? You're already awake." And you're going to go, "No, I don't think so." And I'm going to crack up laughing. I'm going to think that's the funniest thing I've heard in a long time. But I see that all the time. And at Liberation Unleashed, they'll say the only person that can know whether somebody's awake is the person themselves.
Hmm.
But it's like it's a weird line to cross when you get over that line and you go, okay, I can see something is different. You know that. So people that wake up will say, you know what? Nothing has changed, but everything is different.
Right.
And it's a weird one, but it's so beautiful, that one. It is so accurately right, you know.
Right.
And when you look at
Yeah.
how you were 6 months ago and look at you now, watch, just document your responses to things. All of a sudden you go, well, you know what? Things have changed. Now, now there's a lot of things to look at. So it's kind of like there's a volume of stuff to consider on this road. And at some point you go, there's still a lot of stuff to consider. There's still a lot going on, but yet I recognise that I know enough to be able to keep doing that. So what the way it changes is that people stop seeking, right? And if we define seeking as the idea that something is missing and that when a certain change happens in the future, that I'll be okay, I'll be there or whatever it is, right? So that's seeking. Seeking is looking for an idea that we've got. So it's grasping into the future to want it to be happening now. That's seeking. When you get there, seeking gets replaced by discovering, right? It's like you're no longer going around looking. You're standing back, going, okay, what's going to pop up in front of me?
Mhm.
And so it's a different kind of thing, you know. So the emotion involved is different. There's no there's not a sense of lack that needs to be
Right.
filled. There is a sense of expansion that it will actually happen as we discover new things. So it's not filling a hole, so to speak. It's adding to an already complete and whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. That, that's a lot. I mean, I definitely can see on one hand the difference between 6 months ago and now in everything in the way, especially in reactivity, um, almost all the time. But at the same time, I would not characterize my experience as feeling like that seeking tendency is gone. Like sometimes it is, but that seems to be mostly just when things are going just so, and
Okay.
I have time to like sit and look and
Yeah. Yeah. So we could say that sometimes you're awake and sometimes you're not. That's a bit hard to
yeah.
swallow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is the way it is, you know.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I woke up, excuse the expression, uh, in 2011. So we're going back, what, 13 or 14 years. And as recently as last week, I discovered something about myself.
Mm.
It doesn't stop, never stops. Right? Certainly, they get further apart, those discoveries. But I mean, maybe it does stop. Maybe I'm just not there yet. But what
Right.
I'm saying is, yeah, it's there's no finish line to cross over. But when I
Yeah. I mean,
when I yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say when I think of when you say there's no finish line to cross over, immediately just feels like I want to get to the starting line.
You were well and truly on the starting line. Yeah.
I mean, it feels like I'm looking for it, but it doesn't. You said you the feeling transitions from the feeling of wanting to to look for things, to standing back and, you know, observing or sensing that things will come as they need to. I don't know. I don't feel like I've crossed over to that contentedness or you know, I don't know, trust in life, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe you didn't know it existed like that. Now
Yeah.
you do. Or now at
Okay.
least you've got something to consider. Yeah. So I see these sessions as like I'll just cast a handful of seeds in your direction and some will germinate and some won't, you know. But
Right.
we can if the ones that don't, well, we'll throw them out again. They'll eventually get there or not, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a I was working with a fellow this morning and he was a a great example of of something I find really common amongst seekers, and that is the the compulsion to put effort into doing something. I need to do something in order to wake up,
Yes.
right? Yeah. And any doing is just takes you down the wrong path.
I think that the part of that it gets me is like, well, if there's no doing, then wouldn't that be just like someone who wasn't interested in this at all? Like they're not doing anything either, and it's very unlikely. And I don't know. It feels like
So let me ask you this one.
Um,
Yeah, go on, Bianca.
well, Vince, I don't know how you see me, but I feel like this person, but I don't put effort in. I just
okay.
don't. And yet I come to this meeting almost every meeting, but it's not putting effort.
Right.
I don't think it's I don't think I make any progress.
Oh, to be more accurate, I would say you don't recognize any progress. But even the idea of progress is fraught, isn't it? That's an interesting one. Um, if you don't put any effort into anything, if there's no doing, then what's left? That's an interesting question. And the answer that someone,
Well, I was thinking about this since we have a talk about this difference between being a seeker and being awakened, if there is such a thing at all as being awakened. Um, but but if there is direction or I think the biggest shift I had happened 10 years ago. And it was this moment when it wasn't just on head level, like changing one story for another, but I felt it like something has died in me. I remember I went to my therapist and said I had this feeling that something has died in me. And she asked, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And I said, I have no idea. I felt okay with it.
Mm.
It wasn't terrifying or anything like that.
Would you say that as a result of that, it felt like something was missing or something was removed?
Something was removed.
And that something was that considered um, a, a burden or a necessary part, or how would you describe that? What was removed?
I think it was this belief that I should put an effort, to be
Yeah,
a good human, a good worker.
yep, yeah. So that must have been a relief.
Yeah, but I wasn't sure. I
Yep.
really didn't know if it's a good thing or have I just become a zombie.
You don't look like a zombie to me. Yeah. So if we talk about having to be, the compulsion to, how would you put it? The compulsion to put effort into something. Well, I don't know that what that something could be, but if we remove the idea of having an intention, putting effort into, if we remove the idea of doing, can we consider the concept of just being? What would just being entail?
I mean, it would at least entail not, well, I mean, it's easier to say what it would not entail, I guess. It wouldn't be the planning aspect. Yeah, there wouldn't be a planning aspect to it. It would be, um, I mean, I want to say it would be just experiencing, but it feels almost like right now that it's more of an effort to actually just experience without the layer of thought than it is to just go into default mode. I mean, that default mode of having the thought overlay that seems to be there effortlessly, for lack of a better word, is I can see that it is the source of all, what I would call suffering or, um, but it still feels like for some reason if I'm not doing, then I'm allowing that to just run wild.
Hmm.
And maybe that's the trick, is just letting it run wild. I don't know.
Well, it's an experiment, isn't it? So is just
True.
being, Bianca, is just being how a zombie is?
Um, I think it was also very much about accepting my helplessness.
Okay, that's close. Yes. Yeah. So I know you've heard this one before, Bianca, but I want to tell Marcus about this, about about my awakening. When that happened, it was like I was triggered into what I could describe as just being. And in that, I had a conversation with a bloke, and he said to me, Vince, the mosquito bite of seeking is never going to heal while you keep scratching it. And I just got blown away by that, you know. So suddenly I realized I couldn't be a seeker and be awake at the same time, that there was an oxymoron. There was an inherent contradiction. If I'm a seeker, it excludes being awake. And if I'm awake, it excludes being a seeker. It's almost like it's one or the other. So
And
at that moment, seeking dropped for me. It totally dropped. And the recognition was that whatever I was experiencing was already in the past by the time I became aware of what it was. Sure, it was only milliseconds, but it was a memory. My awareness was always attached to a memory of what happened. I wasn't aware of it as it was happening. I was aware of it after it happened. And the consequence of that was that it became really clear that it was absolute insanity to consider that it should be or could be different, because it was already done, already finished. And the consequence of that meant that just absolute acceptance, not resignation type acceptance, but a willing surrender, an inviting surrender to whatever life offered me, was the only way to experience peace, tranquility, equanimity, whatever we want to think of in those terms. But there was no opinion about it. There was no judgment. There was no wanting it to be different. There was just sheer acceptance, an inviting, willing acceptance of whatever life offered as the only way to be. You get what I just said? The only way to be. So being was being with whatever circumstances life threw up.
so the person told you that you you couldn't wake up if you were still, the mosquito bite won't heal if you stop scratching it, right? You can't wake up if you're still seeking. And then after hearing that, you recognize um, that every consideration of what's happening was already after the fact.
So this, whatever this is it. This is. And it goes on and on and on for that. I mean, there's been lots of evolution of that in the meantime. But one of those things is that this is current experiencing, and current experiencing is everything. Current experiencing is the totality of everything. It's the totality of existence or non-existence, whatever you like. There is nothing that is excluded from this, because this, your experience, is all there is. Can you think of one thing outside of your experience that is not a concept for you?
And as you're saying this, like I can feel that exact, I mean, I can feel exactly what you're saying, but it's also like this, I wouldn't say fear, but it's like this feeling comes up of like, yeah, but it's not,
Yeah, but.
you need more than that to be able to be okay. Like you can't just stay there because you know, I don't know, but I can feel exactly what you're saying when you're
Yeah.
saying it.
There's nothing static. Absolutely
Mm,
nothing. Everything's always constantly moving, changing, evolving, whatever. But not from this, from that to this. And so another really good one to consider is now a place between the imaginary past and the fantasy future, or is it something else?
Yeah. Hmm.
What were you going to say, Bianca? Sorry to interrupt you.
well, I think uh, uh, talking about me, it wouldn't be possible for me to invite this. I didn't invite this. That I am helpless and that's okay. It was just that I was so exhausted that I had no strength to fight
Yes.
against it
Yeah.
anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
It,
Yeah. So you were somewhere in between inviting and resisting. You were in that.
yeah, it just happened,
Yes.
and something
Yeah.
died, and I had no. It was not my doing.
Okay. Well, that's huge. That's really huge. None of this is my doing.
Yeah, I didn't feel it as my doing at that time because I was a total mess. I was
Yeah.
uh, smeared all around the floor.
Yeah. It's almost like we find ourselves in a new world and we don't know anything about anything. We don't know how to relate to it or anything. It's just a total experiment, a discovery. But you're not smeared around it now, are you?
Doesn't feel like that. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing either.
I don't know. Yeah. Well, I do know that good and bad is just at one level it's just a social description of stuff, and at another level it is how we relate to what happens, that feeling of pleasant or unpleasant. We call that good or bad, I guess.
You know, part of it was accepting how helpless I am against my emotional reactions
Yeah,
when something is triggered and emotion just happens, and it's it is a delusion that I can do something with it, and yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
adults don't get triggered. And I have to grow up and not. Oh, I was just helpless.
yeah. But there's a subtle difference between the helplessness of a victim and the helplessness of somebody who recognizes that effort is useless.
I I don't I don't get it. The difference.
Yeah, a subtle difference, perhaps. Yeah, yeah. It's a good exercise to imagine that what if I had no opinion about what's going on at the moment, or about my response to a trigger? What if whatever turns up is okay? Because it can't be not okay because it's there. It's kind of a slightly weird way of looking at things, and I'm not suggesting that we get into a resignation kind of state, but just a recognition that here it is, it's turned up, it's happened. So any value from what has happened is not in a judgment about it, but rather in looking at the actual details of what happened. So there's another meme that I use that's useful, and that is that any feeling, any emotional response, any feeling of any kind is a sensation with stories attached to it. So if you investigate that one, and the way to investigate it is to get intimate with the sensation, and you'll see the stories that are hooked onto it. Those stories will drop off, and by recognizing the stories, we'll actually get closer to what was underneath, what triggered that response. And again, it's not to say we don't want to have it. It's not to say we want it to be different. It's not to say we can fix anything. It's just to say, "Ah, there, let's look further." Because when we do get to what's triggered a response, a reaction to something, what we'll find is that there's a trigger underneath that as well, that there are layers upon layers of stuff that's going on. And being curious is a really, really amazing, appropriate attitude if that happens, to discover what's going on for us. And so what we get down to at some point is that we're just a bunch of conditioned responses. And that never changes. The actual responses do. What gets triggered is different, but nevertheless that keeps on happening. But it changes from reaction to response.
And I guess is what you're saying too, is that would mean, or when you feel that way, when you've realized what triggered, um, the reaction, and then you follow that down to see that, um, it's just a series of conditions. So I guess that takes away some of the sense of, your involvement in it. But do you also mean that the that you have sort of a neutral attitude towards preference of one way of feeling or another? And I guess just to, like, get to the end of the story, I'm thinking of this in the context of like sadness. It just feels like such a qualitatively, or depression, I guess. It just feels like such a qualitatively negative experience, even if it's not, outside of the thoughts about it or outside of like the labels on it.
Mm,
And I guess that's when I'm just kind of like, man, I just don't know how I could ever have equanimity towards what just feels like such a heavy and, all kind of an all-consuming feeling. It excludes so much else.
mm. So if you remind yourself that the feeling are sensations with stories attached, and just to go further, and there's some techniques you can use to investigate that, but just to go further, the sensations themselves don't contain any information. They have no
Right.
instructions in them. All of that comes from the stories that are attached to them. Right? So when you say sadness, the first thing that comes to mind here is that a discovery that I made when a friend of mine died was that sadness is really different to grief. Right? And what grief is sadness with stories.
Mm,
Right? And the stories are always going to be, with grief, I've lost something. Something shouldn't have happened that did happen. That's what grief is about. It's always remorse about what happened.
mhm,
Sadness is almost a pure bodily response. It is the sensation that is just, and when you can allow that sensation to be there and recognize the stories that were attached to it, because the moment you recognize them, they're no longer attached, they drop off,
mhm,
then sadness becomes something rather sweet, rather beautiful. It's kind of intense. It is very intense and it's really consuming, but it's not suffering. There's no suffering involved with sadness. But with grief, there is lots of suffering involved with grief. Yeah.
But it seems like though it's even a little bit different. I can see what you mean for sadness, and I've felt that it's almost like there's like a poignancy to it, or
Yes. Yeah.
but with depression, it just feel, and I'm not picking this out. The only reason I'm picking this one out specifically is because it's sort of the one where I've not been able to see like how dropping the story about it has any effect on, you know, the strength of my aversion to it, for lack of a better um, way of characterizing it, I guess. It just feels
Yeah.
so fundamentally negative, or so fundamentally
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And that's because you're still grieving.
I see.
Yeah. So when you think you're dropping the story, there are
You're not.
stories underneath that you're not dropping. Yeah.
I can tell you must be right as you say that. Yeah.
If I can, this major shift I was talking about happened in my depression.
Mhm.
And uh, I said in the beginning, but I was sad today. And somehow it feels good. You know, the feeling when you want to cry, but you can't. And when you finally can cry, because something triggered crying, it is a relief.
Mm. Yeah. It's an expression. It is coming out. Yeah. And often words can't be put to it. Words just don't do it justice because it is so fundamental. It is so much the body. And so this brings me, this stimulates another thought here, and that is that we can have stories that we have no intellectual awareness of. They're stories that are held by the body. They were stories that we responded to in the beginning. They were actual stories. They could have been narrated, but in our attempt in our evolution of escaping them because of the unpleasantness that they produced, the actual narration got lost, but the story exists in the body at a cellular level. And so there's a lot of that goes on. And so that's one of the things that pure sadness, it expresses that stuff that was held in the body.
Hmm.
Mm.
And for you, since it's been, like you said, 13 or 14 years, do you feel like that type of sadness that's just expressing stuff from, earlier in your life or whatever, that there's no story attached to? I mean, does that just keep coming and coming, or does that, do you feel like by now it's
It doesn't happen very often. I can still easily get in touch with the sadness about my friend who died. Um, when I talk about that, I can experience that sadness again quite easily. And I'm surprised that I'm not experiencing it just mentioning it now, because I often have done that. But I don't resist. There's no resistance to that. I find that quite a beautiful experience, even though there's tears and that happens. No, I discover I've got lots of stories still going. Yeah, but like the going to the magic show and watching the woman, a lot of those stories are just not worth paying any attention to. They're boring
right
or whatever. Yeah.
tricks
And
that
so,
have been seen through too many times, kind of?
well, consequently, there's no real response to them. But they
Right.
fade too. They fade when there is no response. They cease to have any pull as well. So I have moments. I mean, I got triggered today with, there's a level of frustration trying to get this bloody charging unit working, and the things that in the instructions that said it should be there weren't there, and so on and so on. And I went round and round in circles, and I got frustrated, but I don't feel at all frustrated about it now.
Right.
So those things have a limited life kind of thing. Yeah.
It's not like you're suppressing it so it'll come back another day in some unexplainable feeling of frustration. It just
Frustration
comes
used
out
to
at the
be my
time and
my go-to thing. Before waking up, would get frustrated and angry every single day, sometimes more than once a day. Trivial things would set me off back then. Now that frustration might happen a couple of times a month, maybe. And it never gets to anger like it used to. Mm. I guess it's quicker to come to a recognition that I can't go any further, rather than get lost in the story that it shouldn't be like this. And then when I recognise that that's as far as I can go at the moment until something changes, I need more information, or I need help, or I need whatever, then I can let go and wait for that quite easily. I don't want this to sound like it's an ego thing, but I can't remember the last time I suffered. It's just, it brings a smile to my face to think of I used to suffer.
I mean, I guess just to circle this back around to the beginning where we were talking about how, um, how you kind of know uh, that there's been a big shift. And I can answer that question very easily. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's how you know. Like if you can't remember the last time you suffered, that's probably a pretty good sign. But if you can remember and it was like 2 days ago, then I don't know.
Yeah. So here's an interesting one. I actually look forward to the next time shit turns up
Hmm.
because it gives me an opportunity to kind of clean up something else that's still there. Yeah. That frustration that I experienced was not long before I came to this meeting, so I haven't had a chance to what we would call take it to the lab and sit down and investigate what stories are underneath that. Uh, but I don't have to look very hard to see what stories are still there. You know, the stories of wanting, fed of force stuff, desire, wanting to wanting things to be, and the idea that things should be the way I think they should be. The idea that my want has power. If I want something hard enough, it might come about, kind of thing. That's my big
Right.
one at the moment that I've been working through for a little while. And I think I've got through it, and then it comes back in a slightly different form. But yeah, so it's something that's quite exciting to look at and work through. Yeah.
Hmm.
But it's not with. I mean, there is in the background an intention or a desire to move beyond it. I won't say get rid of it as much as to move beyond it. Um, which is a bit of a interesting one. That immediately gives me something else to look at there. Um, but at the same time, it's an opportunity, uh, and so the more of these things that get, how can you put it, cleaned up, um, the more there is the desire for shit to turn up again, just to to see if something else is going on that can be cleaned up. Um, the election of Trump uh, was a big one for me. That one really, I had recognised from an experience before that um, that I had been carrying a belief that the world should be the way I think it should be.
Hmm.
And then I thought that one I'd got cleaned up of that one, and that one had been put to bed, and it was a couple of months after that then when Trump got elected, and then I immediately got back in touch with that same one, but what was underneath that was a young me. I don't know how old I was, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years old or something, standing in front of the fridge with my hands on my hips, demanding ice cream
Hmm.
and recognizing that my want had power, that if I wanted it hard enough, I would get it. And in this case, it was my mother was going to get it for me, but I wanted it really, really intensely, and I got it. And
Right.
so I came to realize, I came to believe rather that my want had power. So
Or you
this was the
connected your want with you
yeah,
got it, and then
yeah,
that
yeah,
that was
yeah,
like cemented it
yeah,
for you
yeah.
for the next however many years. Yeah.
Forever and ever. Yeah, look,
Yeah.
Jesus, I just turned 77, so this is like 70 years later. I'm realizing that, wow, that was a belief that's been going on for me for all this time.
Right.
And then when that one was seen through, all of a sudden, the possibility of good stuff coming out of the Trump election appeared. And I don't mean, I don't. I still imagine that his intentions are pretty narcissistic, but at the same time,
Mhm.
I can imagine he will accidentally do a lot of good stuff. So that I mean, the system wasn't working anyway, and it's the same in Australia. The system isn't working, but we don't
Mhm.
have a Trump here, although we have some that are a bit close to him. But essentially, that idea that the system needs to be looked at with fresh eyes is something that could come out of that whole situation. Uh, and certainly there'll be a lot of correction going on after he's gone. But with a bit of luck, it won't be just going back to the old broken way where so many people are disadvantaged. But yeah, but it was interesting. That want was incredible. Yeah.
Like either way, whether you wanted the ice cream or not, you would have either gotten it or you wouldn't. And I guess you could say the same thing with Trump, whether we want the ice cream and get it or not on, you
Uh,
know.
yeah.
So do you, when that happens, when something comes up and you recognize like this source of frustration, you see the trigger behind it. Is it usually something so like clear, explicit or whatever, or like can you trace
Oh,
it back to something?
yeah, not necessarily. Certainly, I've got the story that we don't actually need to see the original thing. We just need to know that something exists, and that something can be enough. And it's the seeing of it. It's the recognizing that it exists, where the power is. That's what allows things to change. It's amazingly powerful simply to recognize the existence of something. Because as soon as we
Mhm.
do, right, I mean, the ice cream story is brilliant, isn't it? Because when you see it, you can see how ridiculous it is. How ridiculous is it that my want actually has power?
Mhm.
Yeah, and yet that's been something that obviously has been with me all my life.
Yeah, and then you see it, and then I mean, I
Yeah.
guess for me, it's been where I'll see it, and then I can't unsee it. There's no way to like not know that again, but sometimes it takes a while for it to sort of
Yeah, the old,
settle
old
in. But
habits can certainly persist. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a mistake to imagine that we have to be able to exorcise things by seeing clearly what's been going on. We don't. We
right.
just need to know that something has been, that there is a belief there, and that belief, as soon as we get close to it, reveals itself as unrealistic. Totally. Yeah. So I mean, you can easily imagine that as kids, when we're really young, we're naive and we have a very limited perspective on things. And so the what we explain to ourselves what's going on with is a kid's perception of things. And kids, it's amazing. Kids who see their parents fighting, for example, will come to the point where they'll blame themselves for that. They'll think that they're the reason why they're fighting,
Mhm.
and from an adult perspective, that's crazy. Because what their parents are doing is expressing their own conditioning, and their own conditioning, of course, the further back we go in history, the more limited and naive it is, but the more conditioning, the stronger the conditioning was way back. When we go back to even our grandfathers, the attitude that they had was pretty inhumane in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So when the kid takes on responsibility, blames himself, first thing he has is guilt, right? But guilt is so hard to live with. It's easier to live with shame. And so we cover up guilt with shame.
Mm.
And then we don't want to, as we evolve, as we get older, we evolve in our sophistication of our escape from that. So in the beginning, the escape is usually a mental thing. We'll escape into a fantasy world or whatever. But as we get older, we might discover that being busy is a good way to avoid feeling things, and so on. So there's various ways that we evolve, but we get better and better at escaping, and we get to the point where we forget the original story, but it's still there in us. It's still going on. Um, and so we cover up these things, and then we end up with a five-layer kind of thing in the end. And all we know is that we get angry, or we get frustrated, or we get whatever uh, on the surface. And all these things out there, they do that for us. They trigger it. And with this particular approach that we look at now, is we go, well, instead of getting better at escaping them, we turn around and move into them and look at what's underneath them. And as we discover that, it dissolves. It
Mhm.
lets go. And then we let go a whole lot of stuff and we think, this is pretty good. And then along comes something else and we get triggered again. So we'll keep on discovering stuff until there's nothing left to discover. If that ever happens, I don't know if that that ever happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I I think I mentioned earlier that was kind of what led me into this, was in part finding this lady called Byron Katie who talks about this in a similar way. I was having some things that I had to work out, and her thing is like finding that story, looking to see what the story behind why you're feeling a certain way is, and then saying, is it true? And you keep going with that, kind of like you're saying through
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
layer
Same kind of
cake.
thing. Yeah.
I feel like that's when I say like the things have changed so much. I've done that for quite a while now, and has made such a huge difference. But sometimes it feels like it's just never ending process. Sometimes I look forward to it, like you're saying, you want something to come up, and then
Yeah.
it feels like right as I do that, then something comes up that's so big that it's like,
Yeah. It's a bit
man,
hard
I
to
don't
cope
know.
with. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's a great adventure. Much more entertaining than Netflix.
True. Yeah, it has lots more twists and turns, or unexpected plot twists, I guess.
Uh, uh, Humor, comedy and tragedy all together.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Can you say more about this, how guilt is beneath shame? Because
Yeah.
I would say, I feel for me it was, uh, shame was beneath guilt, and uh, it was worse, because with guilt it's very still illusion that I have control, I could have done something different, and with shame it's just
Yes, helplessness.
hopelessness.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, it may be true for you. It may be that it's the other way around for you. I mean, I was very much generalizing when I put that in that way. That just seems to be what experience has presented for me. Um, and yeah, so even the concept of one being underneath the other is possibly a bit misleading. It may well be that they coexisted, kind of thing. So guilt was the aspect where you blamed yourself, whereas shame is a sense of helplessness about that, right? Both of those involve a belief that it's something inherent in you that is the issue. It's not circumstances, it's you. So both guilt and shame have that idea that it's in you, that is the thing. And so that whether so it's not so important to define whether it's guilt or shame, as the value there is to recognize that it's a naive belief that it's something in you, that in fact what it was the result of conditions, of all of the circumstances that you were in at the time. That's what led to that feeling. Right? There is no such thing that the Catholics believe about being born in sin. There's no original sin. We're born absolutely innocent, and we are innocent until we learn not to be innocent.
Yeah, now I see how belief in helplessness can be very convenient
Mm,
to cover the guilt.
yep, yeah.
Yeah.
And we are helpless, actually helpless until something presents the possibility of a different belief. And my offering of the belief that it was learned as a result of the circumstances is a really good one to say. It's not inherent, it's a learned response, and that as an adult we can forgive. This is the brilliant thing, this word forgive. We can forgive ourselves for the mistaken beliefs that we had as a child. We're not excusing anything. We're not trying to change anything. What happened is what happened is what happened, including what we believed about what happened. But what we're doing is we're accepting that was not inherent in us. You didn't have a naughty gene. You didn't have a DNA that made you the way you were. It was circumstances. And if you can grok that, then you can go, I don't need shame in order to cope with it.
Well, for me, it was rather some things can be inherent and can be genetic.
Not shame or guilt. An interesting one like that might be to consider, like when I was a kid at school, there were these kids that were naughty. And these days, I have a grandson who's got ADHD, and he once would have been considered just naughty. Now it's recognised that there is a genetic involvement in what's going on for him. So that again takes away that thing. So the gene of that kind of behaviour can exist, but the overlay of the moral judgment about his naughtiness has changed. I mean, he's still naughty as a way of describing it, but we can accommodate that in a different way because we go, okay, he's got ADHD.
You can still help them change, but it doesn't have to come with the critical
The moral
aspect of it.
judgment, yes, yeah.
Well, for me,
Well,
it was like I wanted to, I didn't want to hear there is nothing wrong with you. I wanted to hear there is
yes,
something wrong with you, and we can live with that.
yeah, I get that. Yeah, yeah. So once
Yeah.
again, that obviously relieves you of the guilt and shame when you go, it's genetic. It's not something that you are doing, but you weren't doing it on purpose. You were responding to what was happening, but you were told that you were just there was that you were wrong, and you weren't. I would even go as far as to say almost everybody that comes to these groups, if I say to them, how old were you when you first thought that you were different to the other kids at school? Every one of them would give me an answer. Every one of them would go, yeah, I was different. And I wasn't normal. There was something different about me. Right? And I jokingly say, well, okay, well, you just had the weird gene, the one that we've all got. Right? That's what made you a rebel because you saw the unfairness of the system and you were rebelling against it right from the beginning. But those other kids didn't seem to be. They fiddled in with it, or they used the system, or they were normal. They didn't have that rebel gene, the questioning gene, or whatever it was, that made them behave differently. But none of them are here. None of the weirdos are here. Sorry, Marcus, you're obviously a weirdo too.
Uh,
Mm.
oh, I'm a weirdo with work in the morning, and it's getting late, so I'm gonna cut out and leave you guys. But I really appreciate the time, and it was really nice to meet you. I'm glad Elad sent me your direction.
Yeah,
Nice to
yeah,
meet you too, Bianca.
good one. You come back.
Yeah.
I
I'm
will. We'll
back.
talk to y'all again soon. Bye.
Mm. So would I be right in saying that from a really early age that you felt that the system, there was something wrong about the system? There was something wrong about the way things worked?
I wouldn't put it in these terms. Uh, I thought other children were stupid.
Okay, the other way around. Yeah, okay. Yeah. But still you were different from them. Yeah.
Well, I was told by my parents very often that I am special and wise. And uh, yes, me and my sister and my brother too. We were very uh, very well behaved children without any effort from our parents to make us well behaved. The friends of my mother were telling her that you don't know what it means to have children.
Okay. So you weren't rebellious. I presume
No.
if you were compliant with your parents, you would also be compliant with your teachers and you would be compliant with the system as such.
Yes, yes, my mother tells me that when I was 7 years old, I said something like, if it wasn't for the mother, for my mom, uh, life wouldn't have any sense.
Say more about that. I don't quite follow that. Your mother
Mm,
provided a framework for you?
yeah, who knows what I meant,
Mm, mm.
but like I saw that life has no sense.
Okay, and your mother provided some sense for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't see it. You weren't you weren't focused on the rules and regulations of the system as much as you were focused on life itself.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, we are born and then we go to school, to work, and then we die.
And what's the point? Yeah, I get it. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thought for a child to put it in that context, to see that whole thing like that. That's, yeah.
So it was like I was doing the things that the system expected from me, because what else was there to do?
Yeah.
I had nothing better to do.
Well, that, I guess, in a sense, that stuff gave meaning to your existence in a way. A meaningless meaning, but still a meaning. It was still something to do. It wasn't, yeah. And here you are these years later, still seeing the meaningless of life. Yeah. This is an interesting one. I mean, it's something that Alan Watts said, was that the only meaning in life is to live, to exist. There is no other meaning than that. And I don't know how I feel about that one, because I have this idea that any meaning is a construct, and so no, it's not necessary to have a meaning. We don't have to have a meaning for existence. So when you say there's no meaning, does that feel like something's missing for you, or is that? I mean, why even mention it? Yeah.
No, it was rather. I was angry because I felt like people who believe there is a meaning to life, they are like trying to deceive me into this, to pull me into this belief. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I thought, well, maybe I don't understand things. So I found the Christian beliefs, and I said, well, maybe
Yeah.
this is the meaning.
Gave it a
Let's,
try until what?
uh,
Until you discovered there was no meaning there?
yeah, and it was just,
And then Buddhist
well,
beliefs?
I would like to believe in this, but I can't. I just can't believe
Mm.
it.
That was part of my searching in the early days, was to try being a Christian. That lasted for about 2 years for me, and then I gave up because it was obvious that it was all just a pretense. Even though those pretending believed that it was real, they were still just pretending, because there was a contradiction in the way what they said and the way they behaved. Yeah.
No, but it also it was like, it's all there only because people want to have a meaning, desire a meaning,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
this religion gives them meaning.
Yes.
It is,
But it's so
but
transparent, they might as well
but
believe in unicorns and pink elephants. It's the same thing,
yeah,
I think. Yeah.
and I knew people who really lived, who really have faith, and good for them, and I have nothing against it.
Mm. Oh, yes.
If
So
it,
a
if
lot of them
it's
can be good people. A lot of them can be hypocrites, but a
yeah,
lot can
yeah,
be good. Yeah.
if it makes them happy,
And
great.
did you come to the same conclusion about the Buddhists? The same thing?
Uh, well, no, my feeling is Buddha said the same. Life is meaningless.
Buddha, but what about the Buddhists? So people who have Buddhism as a religion.
Buddhists are as different as it gets. Ask any Buddhist and will tell you something else.
And what you say could well be the case for seekers in this
Mm.
sectarian spiritual stuff too. They are for
Yeah.
exactly the same thing. They're hunting for a belief that they can live with. Yeah. And so one of the things I realized when I woke up was that I identified as a seeker because a seeker was a good person, and I
Mm.
wanted to see myself as a good person. Yeah. Of course, I still want to see myself as a good person, but I now recognise it's just a great story. Yeah.
Oh, so for me, it's like a seeker is a rebellious person,
Ah, okay.
and
Yeah.
I want to be.
Yeah. Well, I guess they are. Yeah. Mm.
And of course, there is this being special.
Yeah. 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 Which is a great identification, isn't it? You know, I am special. Well, you know, it's interesting that as a kid that your parents did that. It was something I recognised that um, became a trend. I don't know when, but maybe around 2090 or something in our society, it became a trend that we wanted all kids to know that they were special. Before that, we were saying, no, nobody's special. Everybody's ordinary. And then we got to, oh no, everybody's special. Yeah, not that they were special, more special than anybody else, but that they were special. It became a social thing, you know, that we had to teach our kids. Yeah. So your parents were doing it probably 10 or 15 years earlier than a lot of people in the West were doing it. Yeah. And of course, the idea that special or normal or usual or non-special, I don't know how you would say it, any of those things are just a ridiculous story. You know, we are what we are. And if we want to describe it as special or not special, it makes no difference. It's just a description about what we are. Mm. Hmm. Well, it's almost 6 o'clock here, and my thoughts are turning to cooking my wife's tea. So I think I'll go and we'll have a discussion about what that should be, um, if that's okay with you. Yeah, thank you.
I don't know. Have I took all the time from others?
No, no, don't say that. No, you didn't. You contributed beautifully. Thank you. Yeah.
I will say sorry as many times as I want to.
All right, all right. Yeah,
No. I'm just
yeah,
checking.
yeah. I get it. Yeah. I have it. I think of this story. I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was something about. But anyway, the story goes, I don't have to accept the gift that's offered to me. But I mean, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because we don't want to throw it back at anybody either. But yeah, you can offer your sorry, and I won't accept it. So there you go. Okay, I'll see you later.